Good evening to our listeners from Israel and Europe. Good morning to our listeners from Canada, US, South America. So today it's indeed the third and the last lecture in the series, and we are discussing Jews in Siberia in the Soviet period. If previously we always had one topic, two speakers, today it's actually two topics, and I will discuss in generally Jews in Siberia from the beginning of the Soviet state and up until today. So the destiny of those communities that emerged in the pre-revolutionary period, and all kind of new groups that arrived to Siberia during the Soviet period. And Vladimir will concentrate on this new Soviet project of resettling Jews to the Russian Far East. So we'll speak about Birobidzhan. But before we start, we will need some very short introduction to the circumstances that made possible of this change from the Russian Empire to the Soviet state. And here we will need at least two dates. The first date is February 1917. Then the Tsar, Nicholas II, quite unexpectedly and dramatically abdicated the throne. And the place of the top authority was taken by provisional government. And just several weeks after this change, the provisional government lifted all restrictions imposed on ethnic and religious group in Russia, which means that February Revolution brought full emancipation to Russian Jewry, finally. And just several months after that, in October 97, Bolsheviks mounted the successful coup d'etat against the provisional government and took the power. And this change evoked very strong resistance, and for the next several years, Russia was deep down in the civil war. The Bolsheviks were struggling against several armies and numerous groups fighting for the power. And so let's now speak about Jewish reaction to these events, and more specifically about Siberian Jews in this context. So the cancellation of anti-Jewish restrictions, no surprise, brought great enthusiasm to Russian Jewry, and in Siberia specifically, we can speak about very active cultural and political Jewish life, feverish even. So dozens of new Jewish schools, all kind of musical and literary associations. For the first time, we see Jewish newspapers published in Siberia, all kind of Jewish political parties emerging from underground, and this new body, the National Council of Jews in Siberia and the Urals, that was discussing the future of Siberian Jewry and even the major project of resettlement of Jews to Siberia. But all these feverish cultural and political life gradually faded out with the firm establishment of the Soviet rule in Siberia. It happened between 1920 and 1922. And it faded not because Soviet state was somehow anti-Semitic. On the contrary, Soviets emphasized the equality of all nations, but simultaneously they practiced a class-based attitude, which meant that they promote proletarians and peasants, but suppressed bourgeoisie. And Jews that traditionally were very much engaged in trade found themselves as suppressed bourgeoisie elements. And for this reason, we can see mass out-migration of Jews from Russia in general, from Soviet Russia in general, and wealthy Jews first in the first place. And if we speak about Siberian Jewry, so their first and primary destination was Harbin. We already spoke about this Russian city in the Chinese territory that was established during the construction of Chinese track of Trans-Siberian Railroad. So it was Harbin that preserved many features of pre-revolutionary Jewish Siberian lifestyle for the next several decades. But so our focus today is the Soviet Russia itself. So let's get back to its realms and speak about the destiny of Siberian Jews under the Soviet rule. So first of all, under the circumstances then anti-Semitism was outlawed, and taking into consideration a high level of literacy among Jews, we see very quick integration of Jews into the ruling elite, and they also occupied key position in industry, science, culture, medicine, and all this is also accompanied by this mass movement from small places that Jews resided during the Russian imperial period to major cities that for centuries for many years were closed for Jews. So if we speak about European Russia, then Jews were moving to Moscow, Leningrad, which is former St. Petersburg, Kiev, Kharkiv, and if we speak specifically about Siberia, then Jews will leaving those small towns that we mentioned during our previous lectures, like Achinsk, Mariinsk, Kansk, Nizhny Udinsk, Burguzin, and moving to major cities like Tomsk, Irkutsk, Chita, and new industrial Siberian center Novosibirsk. It was not only Siberian Jews that were on the move. These new Siberian industrial centers were also attractive for settlers from European Russia, and we see major influx of settlers from the European parts of the Soviet Union. So Jews among them, and it's exactly the period when Novosibirsk, former Novonikolaevsk, very new city, gets its massive Jewish population, and from that moment and up until today, it has the largest Jewish population in Siberia and the Russian Far East. And it's important that I'm using this word Jewish population and not community and not congregation, because all this fast social advancement of Jews in all spheres was accompanied by acculturation and assimilation in the Russian-speaking general society. So we speak about Jewish population, but almost no communities and congregations. And it's easy to understand if we remember about, say, Soviet national and religious politics in the interwar period that supported secular socialist variants of national culture. For example, if we speak about Jews, then Hebrew Zionist culture was rejected as bourgeois culture, while Yiddish socialist culture was promoted. And we see Yiddish theaters established, all kind of Yiddish schools, Yiddish books published, Yiddish music performed. And in the frames of this national politics, we can also speak about creation of the Jewish national territorial unit in the Russian Far East and in Birobidzhan, but these we will leave to Vladimir and all the necessary details. Meanwhile, just let's see the general picture. In parallel to the support of the secular in socialist culture, Soviet Union had also its religious politics, or being more precise, anti-religious politics. So Soviet Union suppressed religion, and in practice it meant that by the 1930s, temples of all kinds of religions were shut down, and synagogues among them. and they are transferred to all kind of public institutions, sometimes to Jewish institutions, but in most of the cases to just general. And all these events of the interwar period were wonderfully summarized by Israeli historian Mordechai Altshuler, that wrote, collective activities of Jews in the Soviet Union were restricted and had been constantly shrinking, while every individual Jew had wide opportunities for integration and in the surrounding society and in the establishment. And so I find this paragraph a very precise description of what happened in the interwar period. But you can't forget that this new Soviet young state that offered so many opportunities for individuals also had its dark side, let's call it so, that is known in the English-speaking world as Gulag, a network of forced labor camps. And this map actually teaches us one important thing, that these camps were not exclusively allocated to Siberia, so this part of the Soviet Union, but were allocated just everywhere. And but indeed, some industries in Siberia were operated mostly by prisoners, by forced labor, like mining, for example. And also we have some cities in Siberia, like Magadan in the Russian Far East, or Norilsk in the Arctic, that were established as a direct development of Gulag projects. And among its prisoners, of course, we have Jews. But these prisoners were isolated from the general population and from Siberian population, if we speak about Siberian camps. So this would be a separate lecture with a separate subject. We have no direct connection between general population in Siberia and prisoners in the camp, but we do have all kind of Jewish groups that arrived to Siberia unvoluntarily and had all kind of opportunities of contact with local population and Jewish population as well. And I'm speaking about those numerous Jewish groups that arrived after the annexation of Eastern Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Bessarabia, and Northern Bukovina. As you already understood, the Soviet state had very little tolerance to bourgeoisie and political rivals. So these annexed territories faced mass deportations, and it mostly included factory owners, large-scale merchants, all kind of political activists, non-communists, and those refugees that left German-occupied regions of Poland. They were also seen as disloyal and dangerous groups. So some 400,000 people were deported from these annexed territories to the interior Soviet Union, and among them some 100,000 Jews. And the most numerous group of these deportees were Polish citizens and Polish Jews among them. Initially, these Polish citizens were exiled not exclusively to Siberia, one more time, to Kazakhstan, to Arctic, but to Siberia as well. And this exile actually ended it was relatively short. With the invasion of Nazis to the Soviet Union in summer 1941, these Polish citizens were released from their exiles and even could relatively free move through the Soviet Union. Many found refuge in Uzbekistan, so seeking for some milder climate. But as we can see from these these tombstones in the Jewish cemetery in Yakutsk, some Polish citizens didn't manage or didn't want to move to Uzbekistan and stood in Siberia. First of all, how do we know that these ones were Polish citizens? So in the text of the epitaph, we see geographical indications. So Lola Geldwert originated from Krakow in Poland, and Sarah Altholz from Sarek. First of all, these tombstones are always dated to 42, 43, 44, maximum 45, as after the Second World War, after the end of the Second World War, Polish citizens were allowed to repatriate. And so they spent in the Soviet Union in Siberia some 5-6 years and left. But there were other groups, like, for example, Lithuanian or Bessarabian Jews, that these lands were annexed to the Soviet Union, and their populations received Soviet citizenship. So after the end of Second World War, they were not released, and their exile actually continued up to the end of the 1950s. And indeed, we can see in this Jewish cemetery in Yakutsk, which has maybe the most impressive number of these tombstones with geographical indications from Poland and Lithuania. So we can see Lithuanian tombstones dated to the 1950s, right? Like these tombstones, tombstone of Yakov and Maria Galberg from Kaunas in Lithuania. And actually, if we had as a goal to make atlas of Lithuania, it would, according to these geographical indications on these tombstones, it would be quite an extensive map. As we have Kaunas, Vilnius, Kybartai, and some at least a dozen of other names. And it's interesting that these people, unlike, in spite of these harsh conditions, still had energy to keep the Jewishness, as we see that from memoirs. And in many cases, they became some underground Jewish, like underground centers of Jewish life. We also can see contacts between local Siberian Jews who were seeking guidance among Jews from Lithuania and Poland. And also, just let me pay your attention to the material of these markers. Some of them are made of wood. And actually, once in Eastern Europe, wooden tombstones were the most widespread tombstones. But this material is not durable, and they disappeared. And today we have only several places that you can find that wooden tombstones. If we speak about Eastern Europe, for example, the town of Lenin in Belarus, and if we speak about Siberia, then it's Yakutsk. Just 5 years ago, we still had wooden tombstones in Tobolsk, but they disappeared. And if we already speak about this geography and titles indicated in the inscription, it's not only Polish titles and Lithuanian titles. We also had quite a number of towns from Ukraine and Belarus and Central Soviet Union, but these people were not deported. They were Soviet citizens that were evacuated by the state in the face of the Nazi danger, or they fled for their lives themselves. And these people, in many cases, stood in Siberia. Siberia was the major center of these evacuees. So they stood in Siberia and accounted after the Second World War for a considerable number of part of Jewish population in Siberia. And these years of the Second World War were also marked by a puzzling fact, so-called religious liberalization. So in the 40s, all kind of Jewish, not only Jewish religious communities were allowed to reestablish themselves officially. And if we speak about Jews and Siberia specifically, we see synagogues, communities opened in Irkutsk, Omsk, Novosibirsk, and Birobidzhan. And in the case of Irkutsk and Omsk, they even managed to get their historical buildings back. But I in no way would like to deceive you and give you some wrong idea about the scale of these liberalizations. In the best case, these congregations numbered 4 dozens of elderly Jews. And why elderly? It's just because these people didn't have anything to lose, while young Jews that were hoping for a good career and for the safe future of their children would surely not feel safe to demonstrate publicly any affiliation to any religious group. And anyway, this religious liberalization ended up in 1948 with the beginning of very harsh anti-Semitic campaign launched during the last years of Stalin's rule. And actually it ended with the death of Stalin in 1953. But for these years, the establishment succeeded to eliminate almost all Jews from the ruling elite, but they still were very present in all other spheres like industry and culture and medicine. And actually, this was the situation in the Soviet Union up until the very end of the rule. So highly acculturated, highly assimilated Jews concentrated in major cities and mostly engaged in intellectual work, and very heavily represented in industry, culture, medicine, and all kind of like theater, music, literature, whatever you can think of. But with no, at least public relation to the Jewish tradition. But all this changed in the end of the 80s with the new trend in the Soviet policy declared by Mikhail Gorbachev and perestroika. And by the end of the 80s, perestroika allowed, due to perestroika, Jews were allowed to emigrate freely from the Soviet Union. And if you speak in the boundaries of the Soviet Union, around 2 million people used this opportunity, but simultaneously Jews were also allowed to practice freely Jewish communal, religious, cultural life. And indeed, we also see the development of Jewish communities and Jewish cultural associations in major Russian towns and in Siberia as well. And these was amplified after the collapse of the Soviet Union with the arrival of international organizations like American Joint. And if we speak about the contemporary situation, we have in Siberia today active Jewish communities in all major cities. I'm speaking about Omsk and Tobolsk and Novosibirsk and Tomsk, Krasnoyarsk, Irkutsk, Chita, Birobidzhan, Khabarovsk, and Vladivostok. And actually, then I'm saying all these names just to show that actually we have only one new Jewish center in Siberia that emerged during the Soviet period, and that's Birobidzhan. And all other titles, all other cities had Jewish communities in the pre-revolutionary period, and they still major, like places of major concentrations of Jews today. And those cities that didn't have synagogues preserved by 1991 built new synagogues. I'm speaking about the case of Novosibirsk, Krasnoyarsk, and Khabarovsk. And in all these three cases, there's buildings. It's not just a synagogue, it's always a community center. And under one roof, you can find almost almost all Jewish organizations existing in this or that city. But in other places, Jewish communities took possession of historical buildings and reconstructed them. In many cases with the help of American Joint or Chabad, and with some help of local businessmen. And the only exception is this synagogue in Chita. And this is exactly the case that you see how this international help is important, because in Chita you have very small community with no support of Chabad, and so this community is located in several halls of the previous synagogue, but the building, a major part of the building belongs to the local police. And just to show you how these new synagogues look like inside, for example, this is the last synagogue renovated in Siberia. It was unveiled in 2015, synagogue in Vladivostok. I think we haven't mentioned it during our previous lectures because it was built just in 1917, so just before the revolution. And pay attention to this interior image. We can see that these synagogues are reconstructed in this style very similar to Israeli and American Orthodox communities. So this is the new mode of worship in Siberia, quite different from what Jews practiced in Siberia before the revolution. And this image in the second row shows us one more important trend in contemporary Russia. The state willingly shows its sympathy to the Jewish case, and Dmitry Medvedev visiting Eurostot synagogue in Vladivostok is a good illustration to this policy. But it's not everything. Not everything is so rosy in today's Siberia. In those small towns that do not have any significant Jewish populations, and actually since 1920s, as we learned, these former synagogues still belong to the state and used for the state purposes, like a synagogue in Achinsk, which is an emergency station, and a synagogue former synagogue in Nizhny Udinsk, in Petrovsky Zavod, in Ulan-Ude, in the village of Kabansk, which is the building of the local administration, by the way. And we do think that this is actually a good case for these buildings, as the example of the synagogue in Kansk or Mariinsk show that other options are not any better. For example, this synagogue in Mariinsk once served as a post office, and the moment the municipality moved this post office to another building, so this former synagogue stands empty and is dilapidating, and all efforts of the local history museum somehow to find investors didn't bring any result. So this synagogue in Mariinsk is currently the only synagogue under threat in Siberia. And just to summarize everything said, today we have quite small Jewish population in Siberia, considerably, 14,000 Jews, according to the last census, though these official numbers might be discussed and argued, but all major cities in Siberia have active religious communities, mostly affiliated with Chabad, while the major Jewish population has majority of Jewish population have very low connection to the religious these religious communities. And just a remarkable fact that local historians demonstrate very active interest to the subject of the Siberian Jews, their history. We have hundreds and hundreds of publications on the topic. But simultaneously, we see very little public awareness of local Jewish history. If you would ask a resident in the street in a Siberian town, how come that his town has a synagogue, they don't really know how it happened, and definitely we have no idea about this remarkable presence of Jews in Siberia once before the revolution. And in general, all this is very typical for the former Soviet Union. But we have one thing that differs Siberia from other parts of Russia and former Soviet Union, and this is this national autonomous region of Birobidzhan. And Vladimir will now present this case.
Okay, good evening to everybody. I will share my screen. So my task today is to speak about the Jewish autonomous region, which in English and also in Russian is usually known under the name Birobidzhan, but it is its capital city. And I would like to remind our listeners that we arrived to Birobidzhan and to other Siberian cities during the expedition of the Center for Jewish Art, which was supported by Josephine Urban, and we are finishing now a book about Siberian Jews and their material culture, which is supported by Dr. Betsy Gidwitz. So Birobidzhan, where is it? It is situated here in the Russian Far East on the Soviet-Chinese border. And as I said, the official name of this region is the Jewish Autonomous Region. And the first question we should ask, why Jewish Autonomous Region? Who needs it? And the right answer probably would be that it was the Soviet state who needed the Jewish Autonomous Region, because according to the definition of a nation or nationality in the Soviet language, every nationality has to have a territory, a common territory. And Jews, East European Jews, which had no common territory, they didn't fit this definition, which was provided by Stalin still in 1913. But at the same time, the Soviet state treated the Jews as a nation and a nationality, and it supported in the 1920s and 30s, it supported Jewish national culture in Yiddish and its secular form, of course. And it defined Jews as one of more than 100 Soviet nationalities. Also, the Soviet state wanted to make Jews productive. That means that, well, the majority of the Russian Jews before revolution were living in shtetl and were engaged in small trade and craftsmanship. The Soviet state wanted them to start some productive occupation, and first of all, to become agriculturalists. So the old idea that Jews should settle on the land and work on the land was still present in the Soviet Union. And there were several attempts to establish many Jewish agricultural colonies especially in Ukraine and in Crimea, and there were small Jewish autonomous small national Jewish units in Ukraine and in Crimea, but there was not enough place for something larger. Therefore, the Soviet authorities, they turned to the idea to settle Jews on a new territory, which was relatively unpopulated and very, very far from the regions where the Jews live. And to understand this, we should read several citations from the speeches of Mikhail Kalinin. He was the ceremonial president of the Soviet Union, but he also was a supporter of this Birobidzhan project. And what Kalinin said, let's read it. So first of all, he denies the Zionist project in Palestine. What does Palestine have to offer for Jews? Simply continuation of exploitation. Okay, so Palestine doesn't work. And if Jews are seeking for a fatherland, it should be found in the Soviet Union. And this fatherland will be the place where the Jewish National Socialist culture will develop. And he means a Jewish culture in Yiddish, not in Hebrew, because Hebrew is a religious language and Zionist bourgeois language. So, in Kalinin's eyes and in the eyes of many other people, the establishment of the Jewish autonomous region creates a Soviet foundation for the Jewish nationality in the USSR. So the Jews will be equal to other Soviet nationalities living in the Soviet Union. There was a lot of enthusiasm about the new project of settling Jews in Birobidzhan. And if you look at these posters, you can see happy Jewish peasants, collective peasants working in kolkhoz. There were also happy Jewish workers who work and build a bright communist future for Jews and for everybody else in the Soviet Union. And when I placed these two posters in the presentation, I found here a figure of a soldier. What a soldier is doing here, and probably this soldier reminds us about the geopolitical expectations from this region. The region is and was situated on the Soviet-Chinese border, and there were problems that there was not enough population in this area, and therefore the Soviet authorities were interested to bring the settlers to prevent illegal Chinese migration to this region. And in the 30s, this northern part of China was the empire of Manchuria, Japanese puppet state. So the geopolitical importance of this region only grew up. And here you can see a map of the Birobidzhan region in Yiddish, and saying that here is Manchuria. So several milestones for the Birobidzhan's history. The whole project started in 1928, and the next 5 years, about 19,000 Jews settled in the area, and more than half of them immediately left. They left very fast. This should not surprise us, because as we know, in Palestine, also Jews coming to settle on the land in kibbutzim and other places. The majority of them also left quite quickly. There were about 1,000 Jews who came to settle in Birobidzhan from abroad, inspired by the idea of building a Jewish state in the Far East, and majority of them also left the area very quickly. In 1931, the railway station Tikhonka, which was situated here on the Trans-Siberian Railway, was renamed into Birobidzhan, and this name originates from the names of two rivers, the river of Bira and the river of Bidzhan. And in 1934, notwithstanding the small number of Jews settling in the area was proclaimed as the Jewish autonomous region. And in the hierarchy of Soviet national units, the autonomous region is the less important one. Yeah, there were Soviet socialist republics with huge units. There were autonomous republics, smaller units, less important, and autonomous regions were had the smallest degree of importance. And of course, this project was deemed to failure from the very beginning. And I would like to quote here the American scholar Yuri Sloskin. We mentioned him in our first lecture. And Sloskin's family, his grandfather's grandparents came from Argentina to Birobidzhan to settle in Birobidzhan. So they left after half a year, moved to Moscow, and Sloskin moved to the States already. So what he writes, and he writes beautifully, the idea of settling on the land, especially such an inhospitable land, made little sense to most Soviet Jews, less sense to conceptually consistent Soviet Marxists, and almost no sense whatsoever at the time of the most intense industrializing drive ever attempted by any state. And indeed, as Anna told already, for all the possibilities were open for Jews in the Soviet Union of the interwar period. Jews could integrate into the establishment, into the party, into the state, in the army, in the higher education, in the industry, sciences, culture, music, whatever. And the state was, the Soviet state was modernizing very fast. So to move from cities to go somewhere in the middle of nowhere and to become a peasant, like we see here in this picture, these Jewish peasants in a house which is not house but it's a mud hut, it was the last very non-logical choice for the majority of people. And we also see that the direction of Soviet propaganda about Birobidzhan also changed. It started in the 30s. It started to stress the urban features of the new project. And you see here a poster from 36 with urban features of the new autonomous region, and not anymore with happy Jewish peasant with their cows and pigs. And here, I would like to thank Josh Hammerman, our friend from the United States, who sent us, just before the lecture, he sent this post stamp showing the building of Birobidzhan and not agricultural work. So some numbers. In 1934, when the Jewish Autonomous Region was proclaimed, there were 12,000 Jews, which consisted about 20% of the local population. And notwithstanding the last wave of Jewish settlers in the late 40s, since then the number of Jews was diminishing, and the percentage was diminishing as well. And today, Jews constitute about 2% of the population of Jewish Autonomous Region, and there are about 1,500 Jews. And we should ask, of course, how Jewish was and how Jewish still is this Jewish Autonomous Region. And we must say that the idea of building the Jewish land with Jewish culture, which works in Yiddish, was very attractive. But every wave of Stalin's terror dealt a blow to this idea. And the first blow came during the Great Terror of 37-38, when local officials, Jewish officials, intellectuals were arrested and executed. And the second blow came in 1949. It was a part of the anti-Jewish company, anti-Jewish strife of the last Stalin's years. So again, local Jewish officials, intellectuals were arrested. The Jewish theater, and Jewish museum, and schools in Yiddish were finally closed. So after the 40s, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, Birobidzhan was a usual faceless small Soviet town without any specific features. Yeah, there was a statue of Lenin, obligatory statue of Lenin. There was an obligatory memorial to the Great Patriotic War, which has nothing Jewish in it and has no word anywhere about the Holocaust, of course. And even in the 90s, when the new Russian Federation was reestablished and every region reinvented itself, what the local authorities did, they invented a coat of arms of Jewish Autonomous Region with the local tiger on it. But maybe it's a good solution, because they could put their depiction of a Jew and it would be much worse. And they also accepted the flag of Jewish Autonomous Region. Recently, I have read with the 7 colors of a rainbow. They symbolizes the 7-branched menorah and the 7 days of creation. If somebody didn't know it, so now you know. And like every like every Soviet town in the 90s and 2000s, it reinvents itself and establishes a new religious institution. So there is an Orthodox cathedral, a new mosque opened like in 2 years ago. But what about Jewish features of this place? And we can say that the only Jewish feature which existed for the entire history of Birobidzhan was the newspaper in Yiddish, Birobidzhaner Stern. And pay attention that it was printed and is still printed with Soviet orthography of Yiddish, which has no final letters. Another Jewish feature of Birobidzhan was and is its railway station, where the name of this city is written in Russian and in Yiddish, again in the Soviet orthography of Yiddish. In the 1990s, local authorities started to place street signs in Yiddish, and they have very Soviet names for the streets, but they are spelled in Yiddish. There are some signs on the governmental institutions with signs in Russian and Yiddish. And here, for instance, Yiddish is with a typo. And only in the early 2000s, the cityscape was enriched with Jewish symbols, like the menorah in front of the railway station, or this fiddler on the roof in front of the Philharmonic Hall, or such a rabbi with a shofar in front of the new synagogue. And you can see that the imagery of those symbols is taken not from Birobidzhan history, but from elsewhere. And it shows the general Jewish imagery, not the local one. And those this fiddler and this rabbi were copied from small statues, souvenir statues brought by people from Israel. And this is my favorite photograph, that even a fence of a ditch was decorated with something resembling a menorah. And there is maybe one monument. There is also a monument to Shalom Aleichem, and this monument is more interesting because it's a monument to the first settlers, and it's not very clear if these are Jewish first settlers of the area, or there are Russian first settlers who established the station Tichinka, which later became Birobidzhan. And there was also one Jewish institution in Birobidzhan for many decades, and this is the synagogue. So as the new Soviet city, Birobidzhan had no religious cult building which from pre-revolutionary time. And of course, there was no synagogue built initially, but during the liberalization of the 40s, about about the religion, the synagogue was permitted and opened in March 1947, and the building for the synagogue was provided by the local authorities. That allowed the Israeli researcher Ber Kotlerman to say that this synagogue is probably the only case in the country of a linkage between the synagogue and the Communist Party. And many Jewish officials of Birobidzhan had the elderly relatives somehow connected to this synagogue, and they, of course, supported the synagogue. So the synagogue was, the decision to shut down the synagogue was accepted in 1953, but it was not implemented, and this first synagogue burned down in 1956. And then the Jewish community was able to buy a new building not far from there, and this is a small wooden building. Later they added a second prayer hall there, and we even have a photograph of this synagogue, interior photograph with heads of the congregation and some furniture, and we will speak about furniture later. In 1984, local authorities wanted to build a large apartment building on the place of this synagogue, but somehow the synagogue was registered as a private property of the community, so they couldn't simply confiscate this building. And at the same time, also from Moscow, people were the authorities of the Soviet Union, they were interested in producing a good picture of Birobidzhan, where Jews could freely have the synagogue. So the synagogue was not closed, but the local authorities bought for it another building and also made the renovation of this building, and this building still stands. And again, Kotlerman says that it's the first time indicates that the authorities took an active part in the establishment of a Jewish house of prayer. And this synagogue stands until now. It's now currently called Beit Shuvah Synagogue, and we can look see how it looked like originally, with a relatively small prayer hall. And this community is a small community. 3 years ago, they succeeded to renovate this building and a little bit to enlarge this prayer hall. In the late 90s, also the Chabad emissary came to Birobidzhan, and since these emissaries were not able to take over the existing communities, they established a new one. And first they established a community which is called Freude. In Yiddish it means joy, so again this Yiddishism. And in 2004 they built this synagogue. They built a community building and the synagogue, and we can look inside. Okay, it's a modern synagogue, nothing especially interesting. Therefore, I would like to return to this old synagogue because it still contains many objects which were prepared for the inauguration of that synagogue in 1956-57. And first of all, we found there 2 Torah arcs, wonderful Torah arcs produced especially for the new synagogue. As I said, there were 2 prayer halls, so 2 Torah arcs. One of them has a dedicated inscription with the name of the head of community, Leib Geffen, and the year 1957. And according to memoirs, those Torah arcs were produced by Jewish workers of the local furniture factory. The furniture factory was one of the oldest factories in the city of Birobidzhan, and they used East European traditional imagery. For instance, the vase with a flower usually alludes to the Torah. And please look at the upper part of this Torah arc, where you have the tablets of the law and hence a priestly blessing, and those very friendly lions, almost smiling lions, and we will meet them in a minute. So besides the Torah arcs, the community produced also 2 amudim for these 2 prayer halls, amud for prayer leader, and each of them has a Shiviti plaque, as it's customary to have on the amud. And here in this Shiviti plaque, we can find the same lions, friendly smiling lions, and all this composition comes from the title page of the Vilna Talmud. Quite ironically, the motif of the title page, this arch from the title page of Vilna Talmud, became very popular in today's ultra-Orthodox Jewish art. And it's interesting to check if this anonymous Birobidzhan artist was first who invented to use Vilna Talmud as a model for the new ritual object. So the synagogue also still has the bima table made by the same carpentry as the Torah arcs and the amudim, and we produced standards also by the same hand. And you can find in the synagogue the original parochet, also with date 1957, which we saw in the black and white photograph of the interior of the synagogue. The other textiles are very simple, very homemade, and they were surely produced by local Jewish women, above the Torah mantles and the bags for tefillin and talit. You see, very unprofessional and very, very, very local. And for me, the most touching objects which we found in Birobidzhan were several books with stamps. And let's look here, for instance. We have a Hebrew Bible and with several stamps. Here we have a stamp saying in Russian that it was belonged to some Jew from Khotin in Bessarabia. So it was in the period of the Russian Empire. Here is a stamp in Romanian with the name of the city Cernăuți. That means Chernovitz in Romanian. So it originates in the interwar period. And as I assume, this book came to Birobidzhan, to the Far East, with somebody. So there are people who brought this book from Chernovitz from the western areas of the Soviet Union to Birobidzhan. And the second book has a Hebrew stamp. If you cannot read it, I will read it for you. Beit HaMidrash, Nahalat Israel, Plan Hadash, Kovna. And not only that we know this Beit HaMidrash, Nahalat Israel, in Kovna, and its building is still standing, and we know very well its history. And we also published about this Beit Midrash in our recent publication on the synagogues in Lithuania. And for me, this is a very touching connection, which brings Birobidzhan, which is on the first glance, it is a different story. It's somewhere far away. It has not many, not special sense for the history of the Soviet Jewry, it has no connections to East European history, but those books which arrived to Birobidzhan with people, they connect, for me at least, they connect it back to the Eastern Europe, to East European Jewry, and to its history. And with this personal note, I would like to finish our lecture and to thank you, or as we should say in Birobidzhan, where Yiddish is still one of two official language, a grace dank.
Thank you very much, Volodya and Anna. This was really eye-opening, I think, for myself, definitely, and it seems like for our audience also. So we'll try and answer a few questions. Okay. So Deborah wants to know who attends today the non-Chabad synagogue in Birobidzhan?
Anna, would you like to answer?
Anna, you're on mute. You're mute.
Yep. No. So this is a very small community, and we have non-halachic Jews there on one hand, as clearly Chabad community is not interested in non-halachic Jews, and we have all kind of weak groups, I would say, as Chabad also is interested in promoting itself as a wealthy community, strong community, powerful community, and all kind of poor and sometimes weak populations are not their profile. So that kind of people.
Okay, so I think
the community is even headed by a woman, which makes it for Chabad even more problematic.
Right. So David Finkelman, I think that answered your question also, because David mentioned that he visited Birobidzhan 15 years ago, and he met there only Jews who are fourth generation and not under Chok HaShvut. And he wanted to know what the situation is today, but I think you actually answered that. So
no, there are also halachic Jews somewhere, but all the people whom we met there, we didn't ask them for the documents or for the proof of the Jewishness.
Okay.
Yeah, I think some of them are under the Chok of Shvut as the head of the community, and some of the listeners says that her name is Valeria Bulkin, and that's right. So she's struggling for her community, for those who would like to make Aliyah, but that's not always easy.
I'm sure. Behar would like to know what happened to the community of Yakutsk.
It was a very small community, even during the pre-revolutionary period. We still have Jews there, but it's also some, like, it's in a scale of several families. So.
Okay. Zachary is asking, how were arrangements made for providing and engraving Hebrew inscriptions on Jewish tombstones during and after the Stalin period?
Probably I will start and you will complete if I'm missing something. So the cemetery in general was actually the last place there Jews did have this right to express themselves and to express their Jewishness. And as the person who died has no fears about his future. So, and as soon as if there was someone in the Jewish community or among these Jews that knew to write Hebrew or knew to compose an epitaph, so that was the people were still doing this. As soon as these communities left, that people were moving or just died, then we see only Magen David and these two letters, Pei Nun, so Ponik Barob. So at the time we can see that number of Jewish symbols diminishes. But I don't think that there was someone who controlled that. Volodya, what would you think?
You are completely right. The Soviet authorities were not very interested in controlling the cemeteries. So in the cemetery, people could do a lot of things which they couldn't do at their home or in the streets. And indeed, we see how the ability of people to write in Hebrew letters diminishes with the years, and in the 70s, we find already very rare example of Hebrew or Yiddish, by the way, epitaphs written in very funny way. So it's clearly that people who wrote them, they didn't know to write well, and those who made them into stone, they saw Hebrew letters for the first time in their life.
Okay. David wants to know if there's an archive dedicated to the Jewish history of the region in the region itself.
No.
Okay.
Lots of documents in all kind of archives, so not collected in any specific place.
Did the Jews living there in Siberia and Birobidzhan have agricultural skills?
No, not anymore. So I believe the majority of Jews living in the Jewish autonomous region today, they concentrated in the city of Birobidzhan. So those who worked on the land in the 20s and 30s probably are not, majority of them are not alive anymore.
Okay. Maybe we'll take one last question. Rosalie wants to know do you know of lists of Polish Jews who were sent to Siberia during World War II?
We don't know, but it should be checked with the historians of Polish Jews.
Okay. If anyone, I didn't read out all the questions. If anyone feel that your questions weren't answered, you can email Bruya, who will put up her email, and she'll pass on your questions. Thank you very much, Anna and Volodya. This was a wonderful series, and I think we learned a lot about an area of Jewish history which is, I think, unknown to many, many people. So thank you for sharing this world with us. And I'd like to host you again at Bet Avichai, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for this series. Good evening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tamar, and thank you for all who is on the other side of this computer screen.
Totally.
Maybe one day we'll meet each other at Bet Avichai with a real life audience, the way things should be done.
Oh,
Thank you, everybody.
oh, it would be wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.